Hi, in this video I'm going wide. No, super wide. Join me. Roll credits. Well, hi, Brian James, that Micro Four Thirds guy with you once again, and today I'm going to be looking at super wide angle lenses. Now, these are the sort of lenses you'll use every day, but they can be really fun. There are a few drawbacks to them and a few difficulties to them, but I'll try and cover that on this, and also cover as to why I'm so interested in them. So keep on watching, and at the end I'll give you a selection, if you watch till the end, of some of the photographs I've been taking out as tests, just to show what it can do. I first noticed super wide angle lenses in the mid to late 60s on TV when I was just a young lad, and I was fascinated by it. Now remember what we see through our eyes. We have a fixed focal length, fixed field of view. We can alter it by looking side to side, but really we have a fixed field of view. We get used to it, and that's what a standard lens is meant to simulate. And if you remember in my last video, there's a link just above to it. I discussed about whether you should stick with a 50mm standard lens or go slightly wider. Well worth checking out before you go any further on this one. But this isn't a normal wide angle lens I'm on about. This is a super wide. This is a 7-14 f4 Lumix lens that I'm using on this one, and that's the one. If you remember, there's a link above. I did a review on this in the early days of this channel. It's a great little lens, not the cheapest lens, and there are alternatives on the market for it, so check them out. But basically, that's what I've been using on my GX8 for all the test photographs. Now, as I say, I was fascinated with this style of photography, but there was one huge, major drawback when I was starting in photography. I bought my Olympus OM1. I was still early into my working life, didn't get a great deal of money in, and in those days, to buy specialist lenses, either big telephoto lenses or super wide angle lenses, was incredibly expensive. And if you bought something which was cheaper, the quality just wasn't there. But I did. In the early days, I bought myself a relatively inexpensive Hoya zoom lens, which would take me to the wide angle side. I think it was about a 16mm then on a full frame. And that was enough to inspire me. The photographic quality was atrocious, but it did really give me some food for thought and give me something to enjoy. But what do you need for these shots? Well, I've said I'm using the 7-14 f4 Lumix. I think it's a great lens. It's a little bit on the expensive side, as I say. Even used, it can be a little bit pricey, but it's well worth it on there. Having that fixed f4 maximum focal length as well really is useful if you're doing videos, because you don't get a sudden change in your aperture and your light coming in. So it's useful for filmmakers. But I find that that's a great lens. But there are lots of other ones on the market, and you don't have to go necessarily as wide as 7. But we'll come in a few minutes as to what you should be looking at on that. But there are some fairly inexpensive prime lenses with fixed apertures which you can get and put onto a Micro Four Thirds camera relatively easily. Now, I eventually got into playing with super wide angle lenses when I started getting into some of the APS-C Canon equipment, and I remember buying myself the wonderful little 10-18mm APS-C lens and put that onto my APS-C camera. That's equivalent to about a 16mm starting point on full frame. So very, very similar to this. This one's slightly wider, but not much. But I really enjoyed using that. The effects I could get out of it were good. And it was the first time I had an affordable super wide angle lens to put on the camera. Really was a bit of a breakthrough. Now the thing is as well, it's a bit controversial, this, and you know what I'm like. I do sort of like some controversial things every so often. Professional photographers for years have been, especially architectural photographers, strive to try and avoid things like converging parallels and to get rid of the distortion, to work around distortions on a lens. Now, the thing is that you're never going to get away from distortion. Anything apart from a standard lens, whether it's a telephoto or a wide angle, is going to distort what comes into it. What you effectively have, you have a square which you try to impose a photograph onto. Now that, if it's a telephoto, what you're doing is you're putting less on, you're stretching it out widewise, and you're putting less of the image on, so effectively zooming in. On a wide angle, you've got that, but instead of having your normal viewpoint, you've got all these things that you're trying to drag into the side and compress into it, push it all in together, and that causes some other problems. It causes problems with the distortions, and the distortions can be artistic or factual. And as I say, professional photographers have been trying to take factual photos for years. But I actually quite like the artistic side. As I say, that was what appealed to me. And that's caused me a few arguments over the years with some of my good friends. I know somebody watching the channel. If it's you, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's no right and wrong in this though. If you know how to take good photographs, if you can work around it, then that's great. And I can do that. And they can do that. But what I like to do is I like to actually go outside the bounds. I do this because of choice, not because of inexperience or lack of skill. And that gives a totally different run to what we can see and what we can do. Because whenever we're using a wide angle lens, we are distorting what we really see. And I love that. I love the fact that we're seeing something which the human eye doesn't normally see. So as I say, I've had a few arguments over the years as to why I do things like this, why I deliberately go for this distortion. But to me, it's an artistic expression, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you can judge for yourself. Keep on watching till the end, because I've got a selection of photographs I've taken as examples around the locality in the last couple of days on the GX8 and the 7-14. I'll let you be the judge if you like them or not. Personally, I do, so I'm very happy with them. Now, one thing to be aware of. A small change in focal length, only 1mm, can have a huge change in what you perceive and what you see online. Now that's different to the telephoto's end. If you've got something like a 300mm lens, the difference between say a 200 and a 300 is noticeable, but it's not a huge difference as between say 7 and 9mm at the wide angle lens. So as you go up through the focal lengths in so far as millimeters, the difference between them becomes more of a focal length issue than it is at the wide angle lens. So just 1 or 2mm may make a difference. Now what I'm saying that for is, if you are interested in this, I would suggest that you go out and check a lens out, try it on your camera first, see how it performs, because you might find that you don't need to go as far as 7mm, but 8mm is a noticeable difference, 9mm even more. So it's worth trying them out just to see what's good for you. Now if you enjoy this video and you're not a subscriber, please consider hitting the subscribe button below. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, but what it does is it puts all my videos, whenever I release one, onto your timeline so you see it easier. And if you really want to be notified of any new video, you'll find there's a bell below. Hit that and hit the little all button, and that'll make sure you get notifications every time I upload a new video. Even better, please give me a thumbs up below. Again, it costs nothing, but it makes such a huge difference to how this video is spread around the YouTube world using YouTube's algorithms. It makes a huge difference. And also, finally, if you do want to support this channel, as always, there's a PayPal link below. Buy me a coffee. I'd love to have one. It all goes towards making the channel possible. And thanks to everybody who's already done that up to now. Now, there's a few things which make this distortion work in different ways. One of the things that I really notice is, if you're using a super wide angle lens, the distance between you and the camera is critical. It can make a huge difference, and it doesn't have to be a huge distance to make that huge difference. I'll give you an example, and if you remember seeing my previous video, you'll have seen me do this. If I hold my hand out in front, this is on about a 20mm setting on this camera lens, but you see my hand becomes huge. It's out of focus, but don't worry about it. But my hand is huge. If I move it far back, my hand becomes very, very small. And I also notice it appears to have a big noticeable distance difference. It doesn't do that compression that you get on telephoto lenses. If you have a long telephoto lens, for instance, you've got two cars coming towards you, say racing cars on a track, they may be 40, 50 meters apart from each other, but if you're looking head on, they'll appear almost the same size. It's that compression. On this, you don't get that issue. When you see something close, it appears considerably bigger compared to something far away. So that compression effect that you get with telephoto isn't here at all on the wide angle. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It almost expands things. Now, if we take this example of the church, let you see, I was about 60, 70 meters away on this first shot, and you see it actually looks, although it is a wide angle shot, it looks reasonably normal. The parallel lines are slightly converging, the church is there, but it's a reasonable view. Coming right up in front of the door though, and using it on the 7mm, in fact all these shots, by the way, were taken on 7mm, they didn't go away from 7mm at all on this. But when I go up towards the door, you'll find that I can still get the whole of the church in, but I was only about 10 feet away from the door itself. A minuscule distance, but to be able to get such a big building in. But what it does show you is that you've got convergence of parallels, because if you think about it, the top of the church from where the camera is a long distance away. The front door of the church is only 10 feet. And that gives that huge difference in the two from how the perspective is, and gives the converging parallels. Now you'll also see on this particular shot, it doesn't take much distance, not only in the vertical plane to get distortion, but in the horizontal plane. This one I had to be very, very accurately in front of the centre of the door to make it work. If I'd been just a few inches off, it wouldn't have worked. In fact, just going 6 inches to the right or 6 inches to the left, and you can see there's a huge difference in how the church appears. Those distortions work in the horizontal plane as well as in the vertical. Another example is this one. I went onto the viaduct at the railway station at Weatherall, and again, if you look through some previous videos, I think there's a thing on Weatherall station. I'll see if I can put the link here above. But I went along the viaduct. The viaduct's wonderful because it's got some nice long straight lines, and you can see where you've got these sort of infinity views disappearing the distance. The super wide angle lens is very, very good for being able to play with them. But the first shot, I'm kneeling down. So the camera's probably about 2 foot above the surface of the ground. I then stood up and put it to chest level, looking down through the viewfinder. So it's probably on about 3.5 to 4 foot above ground level. The last one I had up against my eye, so it was probably about 5.5 foot above ground level. But you see in the 3 photos, it's a huge difference in perspective. So you've got to really be aware of that. A small change can totally change your shot for the better or for the worse. Now, one of the problems with wide angle lenses is it can become too busy, and on a super wide angle lens it can become really, really busy in the shot, and you can lose points of interest. So what you're going to do is really take a little bit of care before you press that shutter button to have a look at what's in the background and what's in the foreground. Because you're trying to cram so much into that frame, it can become incredibly busy. Now, if you think about a telephoto lens, is looking past most things. You don't see things on the ground in front of you. You see basically your subject and not much else. So you get a good separation of them. On a wide angle lens, that's not what happens. It's the reverse. So be careful on the foregrounds and backgrounds. For instance, on this one where I've taken some photographs at the station just of some flowers, it's got a fence behind its flowers. It's got nothing of particular interest in though. It's quite busy. A movement of just a couple of degrees and a couple of inches in angle of view, and you can bring the bridge in behind, and it suddenly takes on a totally different persona. So it's well worth trying to play around with what you're doing at the time, and not just taking that instant first shot that you think might work. Play around with it. A small movement and a small change of direction can make a huge effect on it. Now, one thing to be aware of is watch the feet. Yes, because it is so wide, this angle of view is so wide, not only in the horizontal plane but also the vertical, it's very easy to get your own feet in the view. Now, I'll show you this photograph. This is a picture looking along the river from the viaduct, so it's quite high, looking down at the river and the houses. And if you see at the bottom of it, you can clearly see the shadow of the viaduct itself. Now, that gives the impression that it must have been a very low sun to cast a very long shadow to be able to get into the shot. But let's have a look straight down. This is one looking straight down from the viaduct, and you'll see that the shadow actually doesn't extend very far out at all. It wasn't a particularly low sun. It was mid-afternoon, and the shadow only went out probably 30 feet away from the bottom of the viaduct. But because you've got such a wide angle in the vertical plane, it's very easy to cut that shadow into the bottom or your feet. So be aware of that. Look at the extremities before you press the shutter button. You might be surprised what you've actually got in view. Now, shadows are a particular issue on wide angle lenses, so whatever you're doing, whether it's a super wide or not, just be careful about shadows coming into shot. It's very easy to have them in without even realizing. Now, one of the things I really like about the super wide angle shots is something which I don't normally do in normal shooting, the Dutch tilt. It's very fashionable, comes in and out of fashion quite a lot. At the moment it's quite fashionable. There's an awful lot of TV being shot with Dutch tilt on, but it's something I don't normally use. But on a super wide angle lens, I find that it quite often really adds to it. So again, play with that. Use the tilt of the camera. Don't keep it perfectly straight. Don't be afraid to take it 20 or 30 degrees off the vertical to see what happens. The worst thing that can happen is you don't like the shot. The best thing is you might get a real keeper from it. Now, finally, we come to the perpendicular corners. This is another form of distortion, and it's quite acute. And again, this depends on the distance you are from the subject itself. If you're fairly close, it becomes amplified even more. But if you think about it, here's a shot of a train. Now, effectively what you've got is a perpendicular 90-degree corner on the front of the train. However, remember what I said about distance. The corner of the train is considerably closer to you than the outside edges, and because of that they disappear in the distance. That has the effect of almost making the train fall back on itself, or any perpendicular corner fold back on itself. This is really good if you've taken photographs of buildings, especially sort of flat iron type shaped buildings. You can get some dramatic effects on that. And even a regular square building, if you get close enough in and do this, it can take a totally different viewpoint and a totally different sort of show as to what the photograph is on a regular sort of building. It's worth playing with. Be careful with it though. It doesn't always suit a lot of people, but I find from an artistic point of view, it's really, really good fun. Now, as I said at the beginning, I went out with a camera. I had my GX8 and my 7-14 f4 Lumix lens on it, and I just went out in the locality shooting things which were of interest. There's nothing special here, but I just tried to find things which would show off the distortion. So you've seen some of these photographs already in the footage, but let's have a little look at the photographs I took and see what you think. Well, I hope you enjoy those, and I do hope that you try getting a super wide angle lens on your camera and trying it. It is a huge amount of fun. I find it very inspirational. I find that when I go out with something like this, it's not a camera lens that I'll use every day. I use it very, very rarely. Sometimes it sits in the camera case for weeks, maybe even months, and doesn't get used. But I find when I'm stuck for inspiration, when my motivation's gone, I'll stick this lens on, I'll take just this lens out and no other lens, and I'll go wandering around the place, and I'll go out and try and have some fun. I'm not trying to do anything special. I'm not going to a client's needs. I'm going for something just for fun for me. And I usually find that when I've come back, not only am I motivated, but I've also got a big smile on my face. I've enjoyed myself. And even better, when I get the card, put it into Lightroom and start seeing the results and start playing with the results, that smile on my face becomes bigger and more enjoyable as the session goes on. So I implore you to try a super wide angle lens if you haven't done one. So if you do have a super wide angle lens, what do you use it for? Drop me something in the comments. I'd really be interested to find out what you're shooting on your super wide and why you're doing it. Now, one of the things that I've really used this for over the years from a professional point of view was going out and doing real estate photography, going into buildings, because you can get a whole room very easily into it. But again, you've got to be very, very careful, and very careful as to where you place it height-wise in the room. I find that if you've got to get it round about halfway up the walls to be able to get it to have a not too distorted shot. And again, make sure it's very, very vertical and be careful on the placement. But it's a great lens if you're going to be doing insides of buildings. Whatever it is you're using it for though, thanks very much for watching this video. Keep on taking your camera out, keep on taking your photographs, and keep on enjoying your photography. Until the next time, this is Brian James saying bye-bye. Oh, and don't forget, check out some of the links at the side. See ya.